babes! Welcome back to my channel and to another tea talk. So while my vlogs follow the glitter grind of being a lesbian burlesque performer, my tea talks are the place where I get to sit down and talk with you guys about my other passions: self-care, self-awareness, and self-love, along with other issues and topics that I feel contribute to a better life. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about something that is super important: boundaries. A friend reached out to me on Instagram and asked if I would do a tea talk on boundaries, and I thought that was an amazing idea. And also, as a side note, if there are any topics or anything that you guys would want me to talk about on here, please let me know. Shoot me a DM or leave a comment here. I would love to hear from you guys. Okay, so let's get our teas, or whatever you want to drink, and get to it. I think boundaries are a hard thing for a lot of people to understand, set, and enforce. I know they've been hard for me, but I've done a lot of work in therapy and in general to be able to understand boundaries and set healthy ones for myself. I'm still not the best at it, but we are getting there. And I think a lot of us struggle with boundaries because we're not taught anything about them as kids. So what are boundaries? Basically, boundaries come down to defining and communicating how you want to be treated, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, and also separating your identity, your thoughts, your wants, and feelings from another person. Boundaries could be as simple as the nickname that you're comfortable with your partner calling you, or it could be as important as making sure that you have enough alone time outside of the relationship to recharge, or it could be as intimate as what you're comfortable with in the bedroom. If you're not into butt stuff, guys, you gotta speak up and set that boundary. The foundation of a healthy relationship is when these limits and these boundaries are respected by both people. And they're not just with romantic relationships. Boundaries need to exist in all of your interpersonal relationships, with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers. In my opinion, there are three main categories of boundaries. There's emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, and digital boundaries. And within each of these categories, you can have soft boundaries, which are negotiable, and hard boundaries, which are non-negotiable. Emotional boundaries are essentially separating your feelings from another person's, and how your particular wants and needs and feelings are respected or disrespected by someone else. For example, an emotional boundary could be when you and your partner are in an argument, you've both set a boundary that you won't name call. Having weak emotional boundaries means that you let someone else dictate your feelings, or you sacrifice your personal wants and needs to please someone else. Weak emotional boundaries also mean that you blame other people for your problems, or you take on the responsibility of other people's emotions. And that, my friends, is a big problem that I have. I have always taken on the responsibility of other people's emotions, even if intellectually I know that's not right or healthy. But don't you guys worry, my therapist and I have made big strides with me in this arena. Physical boundaries are pretty straightforward. They include your body, your personal space, and your privacy. As children, our physical boundaries are often violated. For example, like having to hug a family member that you don't really know and don't really want to hug, or like being picked up without your consent. But as we grow into adulthood, it is critical that we set boundaries for our bodies and our personal space. How we like to be touched, who is allowed to touch us, etc. One physical boundary that I have that it's kind of silly, but I'm gonna share it with you guys anyway, is that I used to have an ex who would stick her finger in my mouth when I would yawn. And I hated that. And she would do it all the time. And I asked her, hey, don't stick your finger in my mouth when I'm yawning, please. Like, it ruins my yawn experience. And she kept doing it. While it may seem silly, and it's definitely not a deal breaker, it was annoying as fuck. And the fact that she kept doing it after I asked her not to made me feel really disrespected. And that's kind of like a sillier example of why boundaries are so important. And then we have digital boundaries, which I feel like a lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about here. These things include how uncomfortable or comfortable you are with sharing your relationship on social media, how texting feels to you. Does it feel like healthy communication, or does it feel like you're having to like constantly check in with someone else? If sexting is something you're comfortable with or not, and also the privacy of your social media accounts. For me, one digital boundary that I have tried to set in my relationships is that if there is something that needs to be talked about and it's serious, that we won't do it via text, because text leaves things open for so much misinterpretation and miscommunication. And I've definitely had people in the past ignore that boundary and try to start serious conversations via text, and it never goes the way they or I want. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about what boundaries are, why do we need them? This is the part of the video where I'm going to need to edit myself down a lot, because I know I can go on and on and on about all the reasons why boundaries are so critical to healthy relationships. But it all comes down to being respected, heard, seen, and understood as an individual. A lack of boundaries opens the door for people to walk all over us. and for us to be overwhelmed by the demands and needs of other people. Boundaries keep us from feeling spread too thin or feeling like a doormat or codependent to other people's needs, and from needing to throw up these big defensive walls in order to protect ourselves. When you don't have clear boundaries for yourself in relationships, you might end up feeling frustrated and angry and resentful and not even know why. I honestly think a majority of the issues that people have in conflict in relationships comes down to either a lack of boundaries on one side or the other, or someone violating someone else's boundaries. I really do believe that for the most part, this is because people don't understand boundaries. They don't know how to set them, and they don't know how to respect someone else's boundaries. A lot of people are taught that love is consuming and two become one, and all of these kinds of myths about what love is. So oftentimes in relationships, we come upon someone else's boundary. Instead of understanding it and respecting it and seeing it as a healthy part of the relationship, we feel shut out, we feel disconnected, or somehow personally affronted by someone else's boundary. It makes us sometimes feel like we're not loved. I've had a hard time setting boundaries in some of my past relationships because I've dated people who, when I set and enforce a boundary, they don't feel loved, and then I feel badly for that. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. And that's really hard for me because I do love so deeply and I want to have these healthy relationships. And I think all of us want to have healthy relationships. So the work that I've done is understanding what boundaries are and what is healthy, what is not healthy, and to understand that when someone feels affronted by one of my boundaries, that doesn't have anything to do with my boundary, it just has a lot to do with this other person's misunderstanding about what boundaries are, and that's not my responsibility to change my boundary to suit someone else's needs. That's the whole point of boundaries. A lot of us develop this confusion and misunderstanding about boundaries in childhood. But we can all heal from that and learn to establish healthy boundaries. I do hope that this video can help in some ways, but I always advocate going to therapy and doing your own journey of self-discovery because there's only so much I can do in one YouTube video and keep y'all's attention. So how do we set boundaries? The first step, and the best step, and the biggest step, and the main step, and really what you need for all things in life is self-awareness. You need to know what you like and what you dislike, what you're comfortable with, what you're uncomfortable with, how you'd like to be treated in given situations, and your wants and needs. And of course, sometimes we don't know what these wants and needs are until we're like in the situation, so it's 100% okay to set and develop boundaries as you go along. But this doesn't mean that your boundaries should be constantly fluctuating. You can have some flexibility like we talked about before, having like softer boundaries and some harder boundaries, but the key is consistency. My boundaries have definitely changed and evolved over the years. Take my digital boundaries, for example. Back in the day, I used to be completely open about sharing my romantic relationships on my social media. I would post about us and about them and like la la la. It just got to be a really unhealthy thing, not only for my relationship, but for my mental health. So I finally decided that for me, I would not share my romantic relationships on the internet. And it has been so much more healthy for me and for my relationships, even if sometimes the people I date feel some kind of way about it, but that's their own issue. When you're setting boundaries for yourself, try not to be super vague. For example, most couples agree that cheating is a boundary, a hard boundary that should not be crossed. But what does cheating mean? Is it going to lunch with someone who makes your partner feel uncomfortable? Is watching porn cheating? It's not, but okay. That's your boundary, that's your boundary. I'm not gonna tell you your boundary. Once you've identified your needs and understand where your boundary lies, it's time to share it with your partner or your friend or your coworker or whoever. Because guys, people are not mind readers. Say it with me, people are not mind readers. A lot of time our boundaries get stepped on because someone simply didn't know it was there. You need to be specific and direct, being clear and not like trying to drop hints and then moping about when someone doesn't pick up on your hints. That's not setting a boundary. You know, sometimes boundaries aren't as cut and dry and common sense as like, hey, please don't text the hot girl at your office who has a thing for you. Sometimes they're a little more hard to identify, like someone else would never be able to know, for example, that you wish they would be more vocal about how proud they are of you, about your accomplishments. You're just gonna sit around waiting for them to be like, hey babe, great job today, and if they don't do that, like you start being mopey and passive aggressive and like they have no idea that that's something that you want. So vocalize those things to them. I know that setting boundaries can feel really uncomfortable. And like we talked about earlier, some people can get upset when you set a boundary. And that's why it's really important to be clear about your love when you're being clear about your boundaries. So use I statements when you're setting a boundary. Instead of saying you need to do XYZ, saying something more like, hey, tonight I think I'm gonna head home and recharge. I kind of need a night to myself, but I'm so excited for our date on Thursday. Definitely don't do things that are manipulative or double standardy. For example, don't say things like, if you're not home by 7 p.m. every single night, I'm not gonna have sex with you. Or if you don't do XYZ, I'm gonna hurt myself. Or you're not allowed to do XYZ, but I can. If you communicate the boundary clearly and explain why it exists and how you'd like for it to be respected, you're doing your job. It's up to your partner then to respect that boundary and in turn share their own. I've been in a lot of relationships where my partner didn't know how to set their own boundaries and ended up feeling resentful toward me when I was just bopping along with my boundaries, living my best life, and they felt like their needs weren't getting met. But like we've said before, people are not mind readers. I am certainly not a mind reader, and it's not our responsibility to set other people's boundaries for them. And the fact is that sometimes your boundaries will not work for someone else, and that's okay. That's when it's time to reevaluate the relationship or to have some discussions about soft and hard boundaries. If things don't work for each other, that's okay. That's life. Like, you're not going to be compatible with every single person you want to date. For example, for me, if I'm dating someone and they insist on me posting about them on my social media, homegirl, it's not going to work out. Like, I'm just sorry, that's like a hard boundary. But I also have a lot of other softer, more flexible boundaries that can be discussed and compromised on. Basically, I'm perfect. Date me. Part of the reason we have boundaries is not just for someone else to respect you, but it's also for you to take responsibility for your own shit. Boundaries are huge in helping you find self-love and self-care, putting your emotions, your feelings, your wants, your needs first. And that's not a selfish thing, that's a survival thing. And it's also healthier in the relationship to put your needs as a priority. Also, like, are you even a lesbian if your sleeves aren't rolled up? I wish the hard work was over after you set a boundary, but like, don't hate me when I tell you that it's not. Maintaining a boundary is just as hard as setting a boundary. The other person may not like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them, and you have to be able to enforce them. For example, I used to have a girlfriend who would get drunk at my shows. Not okay with that. So I set a boundary and I said, hey, don't get drunk at my shows, please. Common sense, but like, here are the reasons why. And she continued to do so, so I told her, you can no longer go to my shows. And honestly, if none of this works and someone keeps crossing your boundaries, pushing your boundaries, and you find yourself continuing to let them, it may be time to reevaluate that relationship, but also get yourself into therapy, girl, because you gotta get that self-worth going, you know, where you can set a boundary and stick to it. It comes down to you to be able to identify what your boundaries are, to set them, and then to maintain them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that this video helped you in some way start identifying and implementing your boundaries. Good luck. Boundaries are rough, they're hard, but oh my god, they're the best things ever. I feel so much more free, so much more secure, so much more safe, so much more happy when I have healthy boundaries implemented and they are respected. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe, please. I need to go get a tea refill, and I love you guys so much. I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye.